Okay. Um, well, Amy, I'm so glad that that you have said yes to doing this with me. My name is Joel Ruark, and I'm with Amy Peeler, and we had this idea a few weeks ago of doing a set of conversations specifically about the primeval history of Genesis, and um, and this kind of happened for me because I've been interested in the primeval history for many years, and it's one of the writing projects I want to do is centered on the primeval history. So I've been going through the text very carefully, because it's been a while since I've done that, and like since it's been several years since I went through that text
Mhm.
first, but my command of Hebrew is just way better now. And so I was I really, after doing my PhD, I was like, I really need to go through that text again. And so one of the things that idea that I had recently was as I was going through the text of realizing, because my command of Hebrew and command of Greek is much better, of kind of like in the middle of a verse, I had this idea. I'm like, you know what? I really need to find someone, a Greek scholar, who's better in Greek to talk about some of these issues that like translation issues, but also theological issues
Mm.
that arise from the primeval history. And so I immediately thought of you, Amy, because we're friends from church,
Exactly.
so I was so happy when you said yes, that we're gonna do this. So let me just give you a chance, first of all, to kind of say who you are
Sure.
and your basic background, and then I'll give a little bit of mine, and we'll talk about kind of why we're doing this, and then the primeval history in general. So go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, so I am a New Testament professor. My undergraduate is in biblical languages, so I had a good amount of Greek and Hebrew,
Awesome.
but I'm a little better with Greek, and so went in the direction of New Testament, and that's the great work I get to do on a regular basis is teach and translate. And I am currently working on a project that, at least an aspect of it, is how the creation story, particularly Genesis 1 through 3, shows up in the New Testament. What influence does it
Oh,
make? And
wow.
it's significant, of course.
Yes,
And
yes.
so the opportunity to improve my Hebrew, or at least get more practice with looking at Hebrew, to think with a friend and a colleague theologically about the early parts of Genesis. I'm really excited for this opportunity, and to do it in public invites others to kind of join with us and seeing
Yeah.
what we discover here. So I was grateful for the invitation.
That's fantastic. And just because these things matter in certain circles, where did you do your PhD?
Oh, of course. So I did my both MDiv and PhD at Princeton Seminary. My doctor father is Ross Wagner, and he is he focused on Paul and Romans in particular, but then has moved into the field of Septuagint work, especially Septuagint
Oh, wow.
Isaiah. So early on, doing some TA work with him, I was kind of exposed to the conversations about translation of Israel's scriptures into the Greek and even the theology of the Septuagint translators. So, by virtue of my doctoral pedigree, I have some exposure to this work of the Septuagint.
That's awesome. Um, that's really fantastic. And that's good. I didn't realize your specific background in that way, of Septuagint projects that you had worked on. So I did my PhD at the University of Stellenbosch. My doctor father was not Christu van der Merwe, because I was in the theology department. So my doctor father
Mm.
was Louis Jonker, but I went to Stellenbosch specifically to study with Christu van der Merwe, who was the first author on kind of the latest and greatest Hebrew grammar that's been published in the last 20 years. I think the first edition was published in 96, and the second edition came out while I was there in 2017, as I recall. Um, so I'm coming at biblical studies specifically interested in Hebrew linguistics, and
Mm.
um, I just feel like our theology has to be able to be defended linguistically.
Well
And
said.
so,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was an interesting, my experience at Stellenbosch was really interesting. And one of the things I was really grateful for was, I had the opportunity to take all of Hebrew and all of the Greek classes that they had there.
Wow.
and also in a different kind of like outside of America and outside of kind of the
Yes.
evangelical bubble that I had been
Right.
in before. That was a really meaningful experience. And one of the projects I worked on when I was there was um, a conference that was hosted at Stellenbosch on, it was the series is published by SBL Press on like a theology of the Septuagint and what are some of the methodological problems that are associated with a
Interesting.
theology of the Septuagint. And my contribution to that specific volume was looking at, like, I took kind of my dissertation topic and then specifically looked at, okay, if I take this data and apply it to the Septuagint,
Uh-huh.
what kinds of conclusions can we conclude about the theology of the Septuagint based on the topic of light, which is what
Wow.
I did my dissertation about. And basically, like the data in the Septuagint was like so strong, right? Of like it's so clearly so closely, I mean, mimicked the Hebrew text that
Mm,
basically like my conclusion was like if you're going to try to say that the Septuagint means something different theologically than the Hebrew text, you have to have a very, very, very strong argument to do
yeah.
so. Like
Yeah.
at least in this particular,
Right.
in that particular topic. So there's lots of the point is there's lots of fertile ground, right,
Yes.
for comparing and contrasting the Hebrew and Greek text, which we're get into as we go. So I want to first ask you, kind of, Amy, like your specific take on
Mm,
like why is the primeval history so important?
mm.
Um, and yeah, why is the primeval history important? Like, why should we care about it
Yes.
from your perspective as a Christian and a New Testament scholar?
Yes. I think humans always wonder. This seems to be a very basic human question. Where did we
Yeah.
come from? And when we know where we came from, there's some answer to our purpose.
Yeah.
Even any kind of normal catalog of films are often asking that kind of basic question. And ancient people
Yes.
did as well. They had stories of the beginning, and the people of Israel have this story. And so this is a very human question. I think this is a place at which we can connect with our neighbors and friends, even those who aren't
Yes.
believers, to say, hey, we have an origin story. And I know you probably heard some squirrely things about it, but there's really this affirmation against chaos and for God's sovereignty. And that goes a long way in making a difference in how you live your life. As a New Testament scholar, particularly with Paul, and that's where I've been sitting for a while, he
Yeah.
builds a lot of his structures for the appearance and the salvation of Christ, rooting it back to Adam and Eve, 1 Corinthians 15, Romans
Yes.
5, 2 Corinthians 11, 1 Timothy 2. There are key texts where he doesn't talk about them all of the time, but there are key theological moves that Paul makes that are rooted in his understanding, his reading of the Genesis narrative. And so if we want to think humanly, we need to pay attention to
Yes.
the story. If we want to think Christianly, then the whole of our Bible invites us to look carefully at these details. And my doctrine of Scripture is such that, as you share as well, that the details
Yes.
matter, that paying
Yes.
attention
Absolutely.
to the particular words gives us a sense of the majesty and the depth and the riches in these texts, that if we read them quickly, we're going to miss some really beautiful things.
Yes. No, absolutely. No, I 100% agree. Yeah, and I think you're right, right? Like one of the reasons, like, so, I've taught the primeval history a few times now, and one of the things I've observed is that it's kind of like no matter how much time you spend in that text, people always want more because
Mm,
there's always more questions
wow.
to
Yeah.
ask than you can answer. And
Right.
so I think that demonstrates what you are saying, that
Mhm.
there's something deep in our psyche or in our
Mhm.
human heart that longs for, right, answers to these questions about our origins.
Yeah.
And yeah, and no matter how, like, no matter what kind of like hermeneutic you take for these chapters, um it is still relevant.
Mhm.
That's what I'm trying to say. And I
Yeah.
think you're right. Like this, like, um what was it? I was in terms of the relevance to modern time. Oh, it was the movie Barbie. Did you see the movie Barbie?
Oh, yes. It's
Yeah,
actually it's fun fact, Joel. I wrote about that for Christianity, no, Holy Post, and that is the thing I've written that more humans have read than anything else I've ever written.
that's so interesting. Well, this was recently. Like I
You
watched the
didn't
movie,
see
of
it
course.
initially. Got it. Okay.
Right. Yeah, but it's a retelling of the creation narrative.
Yes,
Like the
absolutely. Yeah.
And yeah, and I was like, that's so well, what was fascinating to me of like when I learned this, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. But also of like, I've been reading Genesis forever, and I was like, I totally missed it the first time. Um and yeah, that's but it's yeah, it was really interesting. Yeah, anyway, that was just really, and I thought this really shows how, right, how these early stories from the Bible,
Hmm.
um even in a even what appears to be a like non-Christian or non-Jewish or non-confessional idea, right, non-confessional environment,
Mm,
that this literature continues to be relevant
exactly.
to us. Okay, so we've been talking about this term, we've been using this term primeval history.
Hmm.
So just quickly, we should define that
Exactly.
term, what
Yes,
that
yes.
means. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen so we can look at the text.
Mm,
And because there is a dividing word in the Genesis text it's very important. So we have here, what I'm showing on my screen is we have the Hebrew text of the Old Testament here on the left, and then we have the Greek translation, what we call the Septuagint. And then we've chosen three different English texts to reference. So we have the King James Version, we have the New International Version, and we have the New Revised Standard Version. And there are reasons why we choose these three, but we don't have to necessarily get in them. But these are fairly time-tested
hmm.
translations,
Yeah.
that each have some different strengths and some differences in terms of their method.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so where we need to talk about is the word toledot.
Hmm.
For people who are listening that might not know about this word. So there is a word, I'm scrolling down to Genesis 2, chapter 4. Sorry, Genesis 2, verse 4.
Right.
And here's the word toledot in the Hebrew text here. So if I'm reading in Hebrew, Ela toledot hashemayim v'haaretz behivra'am beyom esot Adonai Elohim eretz v'shemayim. These are the generations. So usually I translate toledot as generations. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth in their creating, or while they were created, something like that, in the day of uh, God's making, or Yahweh God's making earth and heaven.
Hmm.
So this word toledot, this appears to be the organizing kind of principle of this book. So the author appears to divide the book of Genesis into sections based on this word toledot. Um, and that's translated into Greek as geneseos here, or
Yeah.
geneseos here.
Yeah.
Um, and this is fascinating, and I'll let you talk about this word, because as you can see from the dialogue box at the beginning, that's Genesis, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Gives it
Um,
the name.
yes, exactly. So it's the word from which our English title of this book is derived, right?
Yeah.
Genesis. Yeah. So we have there are 11 occurrences of this word in the book, which appear to divide the book into 12 sections. And then the first six of those sections run through Genesis 11, verse 26. So if I go down, let me just, if I go down to chapter 11, This is the sixth section here, starting in 11 verse 10, and then we end right here at Genesis 11 verse 26, and now we start Ve'ele toledot Terah. So these are the generations of Terah. And so if obviously you are aware of this, right? Of like if you look at a lot of commentaries of Genesis, they divide, right, between Genesis 1 through 11:26 and then 11:27 through the end of the book. And
Yeah.
this is why, right? Because you have it appears to be like written in two halves, where you have a Genesis 1 through 11 is the story, right? The ancient world. And then starting in 11:27, we're now in the story of the patriarchs. So Abraham and following. Okay. So that's just like just a brief recap for those who might be listening that aren't familiar with this word of this is where we get this idea of the primeval history of Genesis. This appears to be a division that the author themselves make in this text.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So, have you encountered this idea that Toledot might be a footer in the text as opposed to a header? Have you read this anywhere?
No, I haven't. I'd love to hear more about that.
So, yeah, I haven't read it. I haven't read many. I've heard, and I can't even remember this. It's been a long time, and I can't remember this name. Um, So, yeah, so at least one person I have read has suggested that Toledot, rather than introducing a new section, concludes a section.
Mm.
So and the basis for this argument is that if I go way up to Genesis 1, that we don't, right, the author doesn't start with the use of Toledot, but rather, um, oh, let me shortcut. So, but rather, right, like we have the creation story of Genesis 1, and then in Genesis 2, verse 4, right, this argument goes that Eila toledot hashemayim va'aretz, that this is concluding the Genesis 1
Mm.
narrative as opposed to
Mhm.
introducing
Ah.
this the second section.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced by this argument. I don't think it. Yeah, I don't think it's correct. But I just wanted to mention it and just
Yeah.
see if you had an interaction with that idea.
I mean, it's certainly no, I haven't. And I think it's more convincing to say, hey, I'm about to tell you the generations of these things. But any
Right,
marker does in some way say, well, now we're looking back and saying whatever was behind is over, and now we're looking
right.
forward. So it is pivotal in the sense of like
Yes,
making a direction. But I think it does seem convincing that it's primarily saying, I'm about to tell you about this thing, this
right,
Genesis. Yeah.
right. Oh, and we should say, right, like if I go to the end of the book, if I go to the end of right, not only is it missing at the beginning, also
Mm.
the word Toledot is missing at the end, right? If I go to the
That's
very end of the
important.
book of
Right.
Genesis, right, I don't see an ending marker here.
Right.
But
Right.
but that but you bring you bring up a really good point that in some ways it doesn't matter in that if the function of the word in the book is to mark a division, then
Hmm.
regardless of whether it's a header or a footer, it's serving the same function within the
Right.
text in that way.
Right.
Okay, good. Um, okay, so we have this another thing I wanted to make sure we touch on briefly here is just differences between the Hebrew and the Greek text here, because
Mm.
right, it would be like on the surface of it, right, you would say, well, if our Greek Septuagint is a translation of the Hebrew, well, why do we even need the Greek Septuagint at all?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so let me give you an opportunity to give your apologetic for why we should uh, why we should why we should have this column at all, as
Yes.
opposed to just ignoring it if this is indeed just a translation of the Hebrew.
Sure, sure. So, I mean, it does tell us about the world in which our scriptures came to be by the time of the New
Yeah.
Testament. Alexander the Great, 300 years previous, had introduced
Yes.
the Greek language really across the known world, such that it becomes the lingua franca. Most people need to converse or at least read or be able to understand Greek and then their kind of mother tongue. So our early Christians, as I'm sure listeners will know, the whole of the New Testament is written in Greek. This is how these wide
Yes.
variety of ethnicities and geographies can communicate. And the other, so in some sense, it's a beautiful thing that our faith from the really the very beginning has said translation can be a place where God communicates, right? There are some other
Yes.
faiths that say, hey, there's really only one translation that's
Yes.
seen as inspired, but God has said, I want my story to go out in many languages. And here's an early
Yes.
example of this. Believers in the one God had started to talk Greek and read Greek,
Yes.
and so they decided we want our sacred scriptures in a language that people can understand. It's so funny, Joel. Last night I was having dinner with a fellow parishioner, and she was sharing
Oh,
that
cool.
she had grown up Catholic and had been in the church when the Mass was in Latin. And then, as
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
in her teens, maybe when it transitioned to being in English. And she said, all of the sudden, I could understand what was going on. And I thought, what a beautiful picture of something that we
Mm-hmm.
see here. These early believers in the one God of Israel said, we want our people to know what God says. And so a
Yes.
translation can be the way that God speaks. The other reason why it's important is that our readers of the New Testament, from what we can understand, almost across the board, there might be some instances in which Matthew is maybe engaging with the Hebrew text, but almost wholesale, when they are reading their scriptures, their inspired words from God, they are reading them in Greek. And so when they
Yes.
quote the Old Testament, they're
Yes.
quoting in Greek. And so, if we want to kind of get in the shoes of the authors and readers of the New Testament, it behooves us to go take a look at the Greek. Now, I don't devotionally in the mornings read from the Septuagint, right? I believe that the church has made the decision. We go back
Right.
to the original. And so, our
Yes.
Bibles, English Bibles, are translated from the Hebrew. But when I want to get in depth a bit, I will go to the Septuagint and say, well, how
Yes.
did people translate? Or what is this Hebrew word doing? How did the readers of the New Testament maybe first hear this text? And that's
Yes.
why the Septuagint is a good thing to have as you're
Yes.
studying.
Yes. And it's interesting, right? So, yeah, I went quite far in in kind of my just studies career before I really learned a lot of history or about like or
Mm,
manuscript history that we have. And it's really fascinating of that even though, right, like this Hebrew text that's on the screen in front of us, right? This is from what's called the Codex Leningradensis, which is it's the oldest complete Hebrew Bible that we
mm,
have. And so
yeah.
usually most English translations of the Hebrew Bible use this particular manuscript because it's the oldest one that has all of it.
Mm, mm.
But this only dates from like 1000 AD, right? Or
Okay.
CE, we'll say right, Christian era.
Yes.
Whereas and we do not have a complete, right? There is no complete Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. It's only partial manuscripts. But
Hmm.
these manuscripts of the Septuagint are actually much older,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so we have this really interesting, it's an from when we talk about the physical evidence of the text that we have
Mm,
available to us, we have this interesting problem that the Hebrew Bible presents to us that's different than kind of any other text, in
huh.
that we have the translation of the text. Our physical evidence of the translation is actually much older than what the is, and it's clearly a translation. Like anyone who knows, right? Anyone who like knows Hebrew or is familiar with the documents, it's clear that's what these people were doing. Like,
Right.
this is not authored Greek text,
Right.
which brings up some interesting questions when you see places where our Hebrew text, what we call the Masoretic text, and the Septuagint, where they diverge.
Yes. Yes.
And so, as we go on, there are some very, very fascinating places
Mhm.
where that
Yeah.
occurs,
Yeah.
at least in my mind. And as we go through the series of conversations, I'm really eager to talk about that more. One more thing I wanted to say is that when you were talking about the idea of translating and that this has been an area of tension for quite a long time in
Right.
the church.
Yeah.
So there is like I anyone who might listening, if you want to like go to school on this. Find the preface to the King James Version, like the original
Mm,
preface in the 1611 version of the King James Version, where they spend a lengthy amount of time dealing with this particular topic and
mm.
referencing, right, this a debate that occurred between Augustine and Jerome. Are you familiar with
Yes.
this?
Yes,
Like
yes,
the
yes,
two of
but
them,
tell
like,
tell the people this is
yes.
good.
So Augustine was like convinced that the translators of the Septuagint were divinely inspired in their translation, and Jerome was like a linguist. What's the word? Like, he was an amazing linguist of his time, right? And
Yes, yes.
he was set out to translate the Bible into Latin, and basically through his own linguistic researches realized that, like, he started translating from the Septuagint and just like, this isn't going to cut it, like, we
Yeah,
need the Hebrew text. And so he
right.
went to Jerusalem, learned Hebrew,
It's
and this
amazing.
sparked a debate between the
Wow.
two of them about and Augustine was very upset that Jerome was like translating from the Hebrew, like because they knew that there was differences between the
Yeah,
two.
exactly.
And what's fascinating to me is, right, like, this became a not really a linguistic debate, but a theological debate,
Mm,
right?
right,
Which
right.
happens now, even with like King James only people, or you
Yes,
know what I mean?
yes,
Like these types of like really faith-based commitments or theological based commitments that arise from what kind of text should we actually use, right,
yes,
and what's actually inspired. But yeah, but it was like over time, like, right, the basically the church is convinced, and the King James translators are very explicit, right, like, the Hebrew text is better, we need to translate from the Hebrew, but you can't throw out this, right, this Greek
yes,
witness is a very important witness that we have
exactly.
to consult.
Yes.
um and how, I mean, it's in, that document is written in 1611 English, so it's kind of difficult to wrap your brain around in modern vernacular, but it's really a good document.
Yes.
um there was another thought I had on that. um and the thing that's interesting that I was going to say is that the people who really were raising issues in the early centuries of the Christian era, the people who are raising issues with the the need for the Hebrew text were actually Jews, right?
Mm,
Because
mm,
right,
yeah.
Christian, like, the Septuagint was a Christian text,
Yes.
and
Yes.
this is something that I think is just beautiful as a Hebrew scholar, is that I, as a Christian, right, committed to confessing Jesus,
Mm,
yet I recognize that I owe a great debt to
yes.
the Jewish community that
Right.
worked extremely, extremely hard to
Mm,
preserve this Hebrew text that I can now read,
yes.
right? Because it
Yes.
wasn't Christians that were doing this. I mean,
No.
some Origin was kind of, but it was really the Jewish community
Yeah.
that that was interested in preserving this.
You know, there's a Paul would approve, right? In Romans
Yeah.
9:11, Paul is
Yes.
very clear to the Gentiles, like, you have been grafted in. God gave promises and a covenant and scriptures to a particular people, and you stand in their debt. And so I think the
Yes.
scholarly world and even our Bibles, how they're created, how they're translated, this
Yeah.
debt that we have to God's covenant people at the forefront. That's really powerful. That keeps me as a Gentile from imagining that I just kind of, I'm a first part of the story. No, I'm grafted into something that is
Yes.
not naturally mine. And that is an incredible grace I can't ever forget.
Yes. And and I think there's something too, right, there's something deeply compelling to me about the idea that, right, like, we are, in fact, like, the human community, right, the is made up of people who are genuinely different, that have different
Mhm.
priorities and different um values, and that those values, even while they sometimes come into conflict, they really do help us, right,
Yeah,
like
right.
we as Christians are enriched,
Yes,
deeply enriched,
yes,
because of this particular value that the Jewish community had for some centuries, right? Like,
yes.
it took a significant amount of work to collate this
Mhm.
text, right? And that we're indebted to. Like,
Yes,
we're indebted to them. Like, it probably wouldn't have happened otherwise.
exactly, exactly.
Okay, so let's do a small case study
Mm,
about one place where this where we have a difference between the Hebrew text and the Greek translation. And I've highlighted it in yellow here.
mm,
So this is the second day of creation in verse 8. So if I read, I'll read from the NIV here. So, verse 8, God called the vault sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. So, of course, this is very familiar, right? The end of the second day. But the Greek Septuagint has this line in here, um, Kaeden hatheas hati kalan, right? So, and God saw that it was good.
mhm,
Um, so this phrase, and God saw that it was good, does not appear in the Hebrew text, but it
mhm.
is there in the Greek text. Um, so now this is a question, right? Like the question is, well, how is it supposed to be, right? Was was this phrase originally there?
Right.
And because because the Septuagint is older, right? Was it originally there and it was taken out
Yeah.
by the in this Hebrew manuscript? Or was it not there originally and it was added at some point?
Right. Right.
Um, so I'm just curious, like as let me just present that to you, right? Like how
Mm.
would you go about dealing with this kind of issue? Like what would be your kind of method? And not necessarily we have to draw a conclusion, but I'm just
Right.
curious, like how would you approach this problem?
Yeah. So you've named the options that are first considered. So is there a different Hebrew Vorlage? The German
Yes.
tends to be used there. Is there a different
Yes.
Hebrew manuscript that we don't maybe have access to anymore, but the translator of the Septuagint did
So,
and
I,
was
I'm
very
just gonna
faithfully
I'm just gonna
translated?
pause. I'm just gonna
Yeah,
pause because I want to define that term
sure.
Vorlage because we
Yes.
might use this term subsequent. So
Right.
Vorlage means like if I'm not mistaken, front text or forward
Exactly.
text.
Yeah,
It means so Vorlage means the text from which a document is translated.
precisely. Yeah, well
So in
said.
this case, the Vorlage of this Greek would be a Hebrew text that we don't actually have. Right.
Right.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I
Exactly.
interrupted you. I just want to make
No,
sure
no,
we
that's important to
would clear the
define.
term.
That's
Yeah.
good. So, like, this person is sitting, looking up, writing down, looking up, writing down, and whatever Hebrew text is on that person's
Yes.
desk, maybe that's a little anachronistic, but whatever Hebrew
Yes.
text has this line and so faithfully translated. That's one option. Another option would be that this person added it in. Now,
Right.
what I would do next is to look at the 7 days of creation in the Hebrew and in the Greek and see in what instances do we have this phrase at all, and God saw that it was good. Where
Yes.
does that appear? And if this is the only instance of it being present in the Greek but not in the Hebrew, well, I would want to lay out that data first. Where does this phrase
Sure.
appear in the Hebrew? Where does it appear in the Greek? And then I probably would have some other questions to ask. So that's how I'd
Right.
go about it.
Yep. Ah, be still my heart. Like I'm I'm a data guy, right? Like
Right, exactly.
yes. So yes, exactly. So we find right in the um we find this phrase right used repeatedly, of course, right? So in here in verse 4, this is the Hebrew text, right? God saw the light that it was good,
Mm-hmm.
and same thing over here.
Yep,
God
yep,
saw the light that it was good. So we have this type of phrase on the first day,
yep.
and of course we have it on the third day. Down here in verse 10, we see this again, right? God saw that it was good, and God saw that it was good. And again in verse 12 for the third day, or it's actually twice on the third day.
Mm,
That's right, because there's two actions of creation on the third day.
right, right.
Um, but we have this same thing, and God saw that it was good. And so if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's every other day.
Yeah. So that makes me think if
Yep.
if the Hebrew text that the person was looking at who's translating into Greek, if on day two this phrase is not there,
Yes.
maybe the Greek translator was just getting in a nice rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
And God said that it was good. God said it was good. Now, that seems a little doubtful, maybe, because if you've only had one instance in day one, maybe you're not quite in that rhythm by the time you get to day two. For instance, like if it was present in all of the days except for day five, like it wasn't in the Hebrew in day five, but it was in the Greek, then I might think this person is mentally doing the translation and is getting in this rhythm of repeating this phrase. But because the difference is so early on, it may not be kind of mental, like just getting into the repetitiveness of this phrase.
Yep.
It
Yep.
could be more intentional. Hey, I'm going to kind of clean up the Hebrew, right? In every other
Right.
instance, we have 7 days, we have this repetition of this phrase. I'm just going to make this uniform. And that
Yes.
gets into some interesting ideas of like, what did translators think that they were doing? How did they view
Yes.
their text as this sacred thing that couldn't be amended? Or did they see it as like, I get the point. God created and God said it was good. I'm just going to make day two uniform with everything else. I'm actually helping my reader by
Yes.
adding a phrase, but that one is in clear alignment with the rest of the chapter. That seems
Yes.
the most likely. So I'm now down to two options. Either the Hebrew Vorlage has the phrase and the Greek is a faithful translation, and the Leningrad text somehow it fell out. And then we have to
Yes.
think about how does it fall out? Or the Greek translator says, I'm going to just make this more consistent and adds it in intentionally. Those seem like the two most likely options.
Yep. Yeah. And it's interesting of like if we talk about doing text criticism, that there's a couple different like there's two different kind of competing methodologies that are going
Mhm.
on in that like one of the principles when we say principles of text criticism, there are no universals, right? When you talk about text criticism,
Right.
right? There's no laws, right? They're just
Right.
guidelines. Is that like off, right? So one of the kind of common or conventional wisdoms of text criticism is that a more difficult reading is usually better
Right.
because it, as to goes to the point you were making of if if someone is trying to clarify things, right, they're more likely to clarify something that's problematic as opposed to leave out something that's clear, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Well said.
And so in this case, right, like it seems so in right, so we can make an argument that the Hebrew text is better in this case because it seems more problematic, right? It just seems
Hmm.
odd that you would have this phrase that is repeated everywhere else, but it's just
Yes.
missing.
Yes.
Um, so so I can make an argument for the Hebrew text. At the same time, right, I can actually make an argument for the Greek text here because as a general rule, if you're copying,
Yes.
right, if you're copying manuscripts, omissions are usually more likely to occur than additions.
Exactly.
If you're right, again, if you're copying, not necessarily
Yes.
if you're translating, but if you're
Right.
copying,
Hmm.
and um and so, right, it's like if and if you spent any time like actually trying to copy text, like hand like by hand,
Exactly.
like you
Yes.
understand, right? It's
Yes.
like you could be translating, you're copying something at 10 a.m. And that's a different process than
Yes.
at 2 p.m. when you're
That's
sleepy,
right.
you
That's right.
know?
Yes. Yes. The
Um,
human mind is not perfect. It's not a
right.
computer.
Exactly. And so and the whole point is that it's usually right, it's more likely for a copyist to skip a line or somewhere, right,
Mm.
and note and not catch their mistake than
Right.
it is that they would repeat something twice.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
So
Exactly.
so I can so I can apply that principle and say, well, it's probably more likely it again, we're comparing this Hebrew text to our Hebrew Vorlage here, that it's more likely that it dropped out at some point in this manuscript, like tradition or this
Hmm.
manuscript stream, as opposed to this one.
Yeah.
So, and this is kind of, when I teach, just kind of my general, philosophy of teaching is I try not to push toward definite conclusions, but rather try
Mm,
to give, right, like,
yes.
I'm too methodological for this. I really like to investigate what are the options and
Right.
make the best case for each option, and then let people decide,
Right.
right, for themselves what they think. And so, this is the kind of thing we have here, right? And I have read different treatments of the creation account, that some who make a big deal about the fact that this idea of who make much of the fact that this phrase is omitted in day two is
Mm.
important for the text.
Oh,
That,
interesting.
yeah, that there's something here, right? Like,
Huh.
and and some would say no, it should be there, right?
Oh,
And I will say that you can find old, like, targums and so forth, where this phrase is there. So
interesting.
if I'm not mistaken, I don't think I'm misspeaking here, that Targum Onkelos has this phrase there.
Oh, okay. So
Um,
that's more data of
yeah,
alignment. Yeah.
exactly, and old data, right? That's
Yes.
that's early.
Yes.
Targum Onkelos is very early in the Christian era.
So
Um,
that is a
oh, go
fun
ahead.
question, I think, like for listeners, what are the impacts of this? What's a theology here? I
Yes,
said earlier I want to pay attention to details. So do we think that the Hebrew author, if Leningrad is the best reflection of the text, is making some kind of subtle comment that day two is not as good as the other days? I don't
yeah.
think so. I want to pay attention to that detail, but if we keep reading, if we get down to 131, um, well, I had pulled it up in the Septuagint. Let me make sure.
Oh,
So, can you go to
yes.
131?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a comprehensive statement. God
Yeah,
saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good.
yep, right there.
Yeah.
Yes,
And so there's a sense in which there really is an affirmation of goodness across the board. So I don't see any kind
yes,
of subtle slight against day two. Moreover, we know that we're going to get a statement that is not good. You're like, lo
yes,
tov, not good. And that's the human who is alone, the male who doesn't
yes,
have a partner. So if the author wanted to be explicit that there's something kind of off about day two, that's not as good as the others, well, you know that the author can do that by the negation to say not good. So my sense
yes,
is the absence of this phrase in the Hebrew text on day two is not that big of a deal.
right.
That like the Greek is kind of along the grain of the text as it concludes in 131 that
Yes,
creation is good. And that's affirmed over and over again. That's,
yep,
I think, where I would land on this
yes,
fun
absolutely.
example of difference.
Absolutely. So, I, if there was any argument to be made, and I'm not necessarily saying that I affirm this argument.
Mm,
I'm only saying that I think if someone wanted to make this argument that this omission is important in this particular
sure.
case, I think the observation to be made
Hmm.
of, and let me step back for a moment, like that I'm questioningly and unapologetically in what I'm about to say, bringing my Christian
Mm,
commitments to this particular, right, to this particular text. In
okay.
that, yeah. So I'll just leave that. I'll just leave that qualifier as it is. That, what, because the question would be, well, what's different? What
Hmm.
is different about day two? And the thing
Hmm.
that I think is significant, whether it has any theological meaning for the author of this text or not, is that we have a separation that occurs,
Hmm.
right, of what's happening in day two is the separation of heaven and earth.
Hmm.
And it's just fascinating to me. I'll say that it's fascinating to me that the one place where there's a question about whether this
It's good.
affirmation of it being good involves the separation of the abodes between
Mm,
the divine realm and the human realm,
wow.
right?
Wow.
Of that, and right, like I said, I'm kind of I'm importing here. I'm importing
Sure.
like my conceptual understanding of how ancient Near Eastern, including
Mm,
ancient Israelites, viewed the world.
mm,
Of I'm importing this idea that Shemayim, heaven, right, is
mhm.
the realm of gods,
Yes.
including Yahweh, the God of the
Yes.
Israelites. Like that's where God dwells.
Yeah.
Whereas Earth down here is where we as humans dwell.
Yes.
And it's just fascinating to me of like if if it's not an intentional omission, it's certainly interesting of like the one place where it's omitted is the
Yes.
place where we see in the creation some distance between
Yeah.
Yahweh the creator or God the creator, because in Genesis 1 it's not Yahweh, it's Elohim, God, and the creation. Which
Yes.
is which is it's fascinating. It
Yes.
doesn't that doesn't prove anything, right?
I love that. Well, I love
Yeah.
this conversation because, like, I made an argument where we could say it was good. You're making a really insightful argument where we can say, hey, there's some separation between the divine and the creation that at least doesn't get the comment that it's good. You know
Yes.
what that makes me think about is that there are often instances, I think, in Israel's scriptures where God sets up a barrier only so that later God can transgress that barrier
Yes.
in
That's
himself.
really, yeah, that's really interesting.
That's
Yeah,
much
for
about
sure.
the temple, right? Like all of the
Yes.
barriers to access to God's presence, then God himself transgresses by coming in the
Yes.
person of the Son. I wonder if there's something very, and again, yes, reading very Christologically, that's set up here saying, this distance, um, does not get the comment of good, but it's still God intentionally sets it up. I wouldn't want people to hear
Yes.
like, hey, the comment that lacks it's good means that like this was a mistake or God didn't really want to do this. You're
Right.
not at all saying that. But no, God
No.
intentionally set up a barrier only so that in the future, both in the coming of the Son and in the kingdom where heaven and earth are united again, that God can transgress this very barrier that God created.
Yes.
So it's
And,
it's not good because it's not going to be permanent.
yes, exactly. And I think right like in some ways it kind of sets up this uh I can't remember the Hebrew verb offhand off the top of my head. I have to look it up. But this idea of breaking in, right? That like
Yes.
that
Yes.
it's the right it's in the prophetic literature if I'm not mistaken. This idea that
Mm.
God is going to break in to the human existence.
Yes.
Um and we see this in different ways even here in the primeval history, right? Of like
Huh.
when the
Right.
in the Babel narrative, like when humanity is constructing the tower, right? God says, "I'm going to let us go down, right, to see what they're doing." And so we see this pattern, right, of like in creation we have this division, but how throughout the Hebrew Bible then God breaks that barrier.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Ah,
it's
that's
exactly
that's really insightful. Wow.
it's really cool. Yeah. Okay, so just a brief recap. So what we've kind of been talking about here is introducing the Hebrew text and
Mm.
talking about some of the distinctions between our Hebrew and the Greek text that we have available to us, and um, kind of been highlighting the need for both and kind of setting up this series of conversations we're hoping to have of dialoguing about both of these texts and interacting with them and what that means for us as Christians today.
Yes, exactly. This has already been a lot of fun, informative, and I think we've come to some really powerful
Yeah,
ideas about God and what's good by this little textual variant. How fun.
I it is fun. It is fun. Okay, and then so the next time, whenever it is that we do this again, we're going to be focusing on the idea is to focus on this little phrase of Varuach Elohim Merachefet al Panei Hamayim. So, and the Spirit of God, or
Mm.
however we translate this phrase, Ruach
Hmm.
Elohim. We're talking about this of uh, does this? Was hovering over the face of the waters.
Mm.
So this is a big theological question of is this Ruach Elohim? Does this talk? Is this the Spirit of God or is it something else? And we can even see in our English translations here, uh, KJV says Spirit of God, NIV says Spirit of God, but the NRSV does
Yes,
something different, says a wind from
right.
God. So that's where we're going next.
Awesome.